I'm Dominic Gramsci, 20 years, WPA member, 20 days, WPA president. It's a daunting task to have been the program chair for this conference because we really do want you to have the best experience you can at this conference. So it's such a pleasure to see all of you here. It's like throwing a party for a bunch of 300 close friends, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience to be with you tonight. Since I've been on the job for 20 days now, I want to actually start by introducing someone who actually knows how to do this. Our immediate past president, Susan Miller Cochran.
I think Dominic has completely oversold my abilities up here, but he very graciously invited me as immediate past president to just say a couple of words about the state of the organization and kind of how we're moving forward based on what we've been doing for the last couple of years. For those of you who went to the last two conferences in Boise and in Raleigh, you might remember that our themes were sustainability and inclusiveness in the organization. And those really have been my goals for how I would like to see the organization moving forward. We had some wonderful discussions last year in Raleigh about how to make our organization more inclusive of a range of institutions, how to have different voices at the table, a range of people participating in our conversations about what it means to do work in writing programs, to administer writing programs. And those focuses really have been what I've been trying to focus on for the last couple of years. Specifically the questions of what processes, what structures, what assumptions do we need to revise or rethink in the organization to be more sustainable and to be more inclusive moving forward. There are some things that we've changed about our practices that you'll notice. We have Tracy up front who's live streaming what we're doing in the plenary this evening. Thank you, Tracy. So, and as many of you know, the cost for coming here was prohibitive for some of our members to be here with us this year. So that gives us another avenue for people to participate in the organization and to hear what's going on. I'm really excited about the direction that we're headed. The way that Dominic has structured the conference this year is going to allow for even more dialogue than we've had in the past, which I think is going to give us more space for those kinds of conversations about planning, to get input from a range of people in the organization. And those are the kinds of steps that we need to have to really move initiatives forward about sustainability, about inclusiveness in the organization. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dominic, who has done a marvelous job of organizing the conference this year.
Actually, Kirsten Benson organized the conference, and so it's my pleasure. All of you, some of you or another had a problem solved or some other issue dealt with by Kirsten, so I want to introduce her and welcome you here to Knoxville.
We finally are here after all the emails you may have gotten from me. Glad to see all of you here. I'm glad you're here in Knoxville. I hope you have a nice time while you're here. I wanted to take a couple of minutes just before we get started to give some thanks to a number of people who have brought all of you together. I think that actually, Dominic says I organized the conference, but in fact, as you know, as the program chair, Dominic, did a lot of the heavy lifting, to create a really wonderful collection of panels and talks that we have. So I especially want to say thanks to him for the wisdom and the guidance that I've benefited from in the process of organizing this event. So let's go ahead and give some thanks to Dominic. So the behind-the-scenes folks, of course, deserve a lot of thanks for everything that's happening over the next few days. And the team that we had, really nothing short of amazing. We started this process, if you can believe it, 10 years ago, I believe. And so the process of kind of getting contracts, et cetera, in place has really been a journey. And UT conferences in particular has played such a huge role in the entire process. So I see actually standing out here Jessica Sweat from UT conferences, and really, Jessica really deserves the lion's share of all the praise for what happens here today. I mean, she received zillions of emails from me on a daily basis, I think, for the past month, and answered them all. She and Megan, her colleague, Megan Bolton, answered them all with such a pleasant demeanor, even though I might have guessed that behind the scenes they're like, oh gosh, here's another email from her again. But really, I appreciate the help and the guidance, and like I said, they've done so much to make all of this happen. For me, it's been a process of learning to know what I didn't know, and they have kindly guided me in the right direction for all of those things. Mindy Jackson, also down at registration, is doing all the actual, taking your money, I guess. Making sure that you're registered and everything. So the whole team of UT conferences, Mark from the technology, we really appreciate everybody. A few more people to go ahead and thank. Kelly Kinney, who organized all the sponsors, and actually Kelly's not here tonight, but she organized all of the sponsorships for which we are very grateful. Christine Couturier, actually I don't know if Christine is here yet. Oh, there, yep. Treasurer, who also has helped so much with all of the details of making sure that we can pay all the bills and balance the books for the conference. So I appreciate that quite a lot. So thank you, Christine, and I want to make sure that you guys are recognized. Heidi and Jesse, are you guys in the room? Heidi and Jesse, I've benefited so much from your help over the past months too, learning from what you guys did, and so a lot of what you did I just copied. So thank you for that. Okay, locally, a few people that I want to mention also. We have a lot of graduate students who are volunteering during the conference. Some of them you'll see at the registration table, and they have, over the past several months, actually helped me with a lot of the details. In particular, Jackie Kerr and Kaylee Mabu-Finn have spent actually maybe 2 years working with me on this conference, and so they have gone through so many parts of the organizing, and I want to make sure that people, if you see them, tell them thank you too. Coraline Fultz, Kimberly Turner, created the accessibility guide along with Jessica's help actually, and Bree Garrett from the University of West Florida. Kaylee, Kimberly, and Paige Turner are taking care of the social media, which I hope that you will actually connect with for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And they're doing a great job so far, and I think you'll see some more updates as we go along through the next few days. Let's see. The guidebook help that I got from Jeff Ringer, Allie Burns, Stacy Connor, Julie Cruz, Kendall Jaggers, Hannah Soplo, and Joe Wilson. And also most of them are going to be at the registration table as well. They've generously given all their time. So it's a huge effort to put on one of these things, and there's a lot of people involved, but I hope you'll join me in thanking all of these folks now.
So I want to add to the thanks a little bit. It's wonderful to be in Knoxville. It's a great city. The 2 visits I've had here now, I've really fallen in love with this place. So it's a very welcoming city. We're really happy to be here. I also want to thank, of course, all the past leaders of the organization, the executive board. We are an all-volunteer organization. And so the work that people do, they do out of the goodness of their heart, and the mission of this organization, the mission of literacy education, and I'm deeply grateful to them. The proposal reviewers, we turned around the proposals very quickly for us this year, and were able to get answers back to you as quickly as we could. Of course, we have many sponsors we'll be thanking throughout the conference, Paranotes, Bedford St. Martin, McMillan, and Pearson in particular, but all the book representatives that are here with us as well to help us be able to afford to do this conference. The leadership of WPA Go has really been important to this organization generally, and especially in the planning of this conference. I also want to thank Nancy Welch and Tony Scott, who we'll hear from in a little while, for lending the intellectual support to this conference. Their book, their edited collection, really did lend itself to the times that we are facing as WPAs, and as you'll hear soon, their work will, I think, inspire what we do throughout the conference. So just a couple of words on that. First of all, Michael McCamley, our CWPA secretary, wanted to let you know that he'll be available at the registration booth to help you become members, to check your membership status, to renew your membership, especially on Friday afternoon and all day Saturday if you want to stop by and chat with him if you are not a member, or if you're not sure what the status of your membership is, he'll be glad to talk to you. I also want to thank WPA Go for helping us develop the first scholarly makerspace we'll have at this conference. Downstairs in the Hawassi room, there will be a space for graduate students to work together on projects they have in process throughout the conference. But I want to make it clear that we want all of us to stop by and see those projects that are going on. So it's not just for graduate students, they will be there, but we'd love to see some of the established scholars in this room to come by and see the great work they're doing, offer some advice, do some mentoring. So if you have time, it's right next to the Starbucks down there, so grab a cup of coffee, go on in and chat with some of the graduate students. We think this is a feature of the conference that will be ongoing if we can find space throughout the years to come, because we think that coming to this conference for graduate students and getting some work done with some of the mentors that are here would really be valuable. So thanks to WPA for suggesting this, and we're glad we could do this. Just a word about the structure of the conference that was mentioned briefly. Our hope is that this conference will have a structure to it that allows you to start with the talk tonight, go through your 2 days here, thinking about the issues that WPA's face currently, issues of austerity, but issues generally that we face, to listen closely to what you hear throughout the conference from your colleagues, to take notes on those things, and there will be an opportunity at Saturday lunch to have a discussion about the issues that you feel are most important for WPAs and to this organization, and also to be able to upload some of those thoughts to a brief survey during lunch that day on your phones or afterward, to let us know what you're thinking and what you're hearing, so that we can capture some of the things that are being discussed at this conference. So we really want this structure of the conference to be all about you as members telling us as your leaders to be able to, what issues are most important to you so that we can address them. At Friday lunch, you will have an opportunity to talk about the intellectual work of writing program administrators by some of the people that are working on that document, but even more importantly, working on that issue of how do we let people know the work we do is in fact important, serious intellectual work, and how can we help that to support the work you do in your home institutions as you look for funding, and at your home institutions as you look for tenure and promotion. That work is really important, and important enough that we want to highlight it in one of our discussions on Friday. So we'll be doing that at Friday lunch. So I do hope you will come to those meals ready to eat, but also ready to have some good discussions with us and to leave us with good ideas for what we can do going forward. So at this point, just a couple last things before we move on to the plenary. One is I'd like to thank the workshop leaders for the work they did with our newest WPAs and those. I think the workshop is one of the most important things that we do organization because it brings new people in. I did the workshop 20 years ago, and without it, I would simply not have been able to do my job. So if I could ask the workshop leaders and the participants to stand. I've also heard great reports about today's institute, and the institutes are important moments also for us to do kind of structured and more intensive learning at these conferences, and I've benefited by several of those myself. So I'd like to ask the institute leaders from today's institute and those who participated to stand as well. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Kirsten, and then we will go on with the show.
Okay, well, every conference depends on its sponsors for a lot of support, and one of the things that I just wanted to do just now is to welcome Anna Tsing up here just to say a word about McGraw's sponsorship of this evening's event.
Hi everyone, welcome to Knoxville. My name is Anna Tsing. I'm the editor for English at McGraw-Hill Education. I'm here with my colleague Kelly Villela. She's the director for English at McGraw-Hill as well. And we are thrilled to sponsor this opening cocktail reception. The theme of this conference is about empowering and supporting WPAs and writing programs. And that's why we're here too. We care about writing and we care about student success. Part of McGraw-Hill's mission statement is about unlocking the potential of each learner. And we believe that starts with the ability to write and write well. Yes, thank you. So that's also why we're here. And we know that writing programs are facing all sorts of constraints today. And our goal is to really collaborate with you and understand your challenges as writing program administrators and partner with you to understand those challenges and make sure that all students have access to quality writing instruction. I was actually an English major myself. I worked at the writing center at my college as a peer tutor, and I helped fellow students with their writing assignments and papers. And what it really taught me was that writing is not just about putting words, grammatically correct on a page. It's more about communicating and arguing your point and thinking critically, and helping fellow students express their thoughts. Really taught me how to be a better writer and truly how to be a better person. So I just feel really lucky today that my job allows me to work with those who teach the writing process and also learn about it. So we have a table. We'd love to meet you all and hear your thoughts. So enjoy the conference. Thank you so much.
To introduce to you. It's my pleasure to introduce Chuck Collins, who is the Associate Dean and Professor of Mathematics in the College of Arts and Sciences here at UT, and the college is one of the conference's sponsors. Chuck's role, I think, as the chair of the university's Gen Ed committee for a number of years, I won't count how many. And now in his role as Associate Dean has included a great deal of support for the writing programs at UT. And so we are happy to have Chuck just say a few words to us to welcome you all here and to help get us going. So thank you. Chuck, comments.
Good evening. Anyway, on behalf of the students, staff, faculty, and administrators of the College of Arts and Sciences, I welcome you to Knoxville, of course, and this conference. And I hope you'll have some time to wander across the bridge to see our ever-expanding, ever-under-construction campus. The same thing. A former occupant of my position as Associate Dean, Don Cox, was an English professor here at UT. And he was once asked to give the opening remarks to a math conference. So when Kirsten emailed me and said, "Can you speak?" Of course I said yes, because I'm a good citizen and I do what the dean can. But I also realized there was a chance for payback. So what Don had done was Google math jokes. And to tell us about this. So I did the same. The first thing I discovered is that you have to carefully phrase your search. If you say writing jokes, then it's jokes, how to write jokes, which is not what I want to do. So I found, and then you look at jokes about writing, and I got a little narrowed down. I found that most of them are samples of writing, usually with problems with either a comma or an apostrophe or spelling, and then someone making some sort of snarky comment about it. But I did find one that I liked and understood. So you tell me if it's any good or not. Okay, so here it goes. The past, the present, and the future walked into a bar. It was tense. Don got a good response too. Anyway, on a better and in a more serious note, I also consider the role of college writing programs today, and the use of social media and other forms like that in our, as I call it, our portable Gutenberg press we all carry around with us. There are probably more words being published each day now than ever in history, and thus it is so important. This is especially for our college graduates. To be able to express ideas clearly and effectively. And achieving that goal is the true and deep value of liberal arts education and one of the core values of our College of Arts and Sciences, which is one of the reasons we choose to support this. And of course, the foundation for achieving that, as you all know, falls on the back of your writing programs. And so I'm very glad you all can come here and do this. We at UT are very proud of our writing program. As Kirsten said, I've been involved in sort of peripheral ways, but watched them over the years adjust and adapt in times of lean resources to provide all of our students with excellent instruction in critical reading, writing, and thinking. I hope you are as well appreciated on your campus. I hope, yes. And can find through this conference new ideas and connections that can help you meet your goals. I have found in my professional career that meetings like this, where you're with like-minded people who are also passionate about changing the world, are great opportunities for growth and learning. So again, on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences, welcome.
It is time to move on to the plenary, and I have the pleasure of introducing Seth Kahn, who will be introducing our program. And there is, in times of austerity, we know it is those who are most at risk, most able to defend themselves, most unable to defend themselves, that are usually the ones who suffer. And there's not been a more fierce advocate for the underserved than Seth Kahn and his work in labor issues and the profession. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Seth, to be able to introduce our two plenary speakers tonight.
I'm glad I opted out of the string of puns that I had thought about putting together. I would have just got totally outdone. It would have been fun. So thank you, Dominic, for the kind words. I will someday be the person who can live up to that. And I certainly want to echo everybody's thanks to the people who have been involved with organizing and putting on the show. And I was was involved with one very small local conference on my campus a few years ago and got just a glimmer of how complicated all this is. And people who are good at doing it are amazing to me. So thank you all for the work that you've done putting this on. It is my very great honor to introduce tonight's plenary speakers, Nancy Welch and Tony Scott. I admire a great many people in our field. Many of you are in this room right now, but nobody more than Nancy and Tony. As a result of which, I'm only going to talk for a couple of few minutes about them so that we get to hear what they have to say, which is the reason that we're actually here. So let me share some details of their accomplishments, just in case you need to be convinced that they're good at what they do. And then I want to talk a little bit about what I hope happens here tonight based on the experiences that I have had learning with them and from them at conferences and in my conversations with them over the years. Nancy Welch is a professor of English at the University of Vermont, where she teaches a wide array of courses. The one that I would most like to take is called Dreamwork and Discipline, Freud, Bakhtian, and the Teaching of Writing. Her CV features publications in college English and 3Cs, as well as the International Socialist Review and the Community Literacy Journal. She won a Braddock Award in 2011 for the best article in college English for We're Here and We're Not Going Anywhere, Why Working Class Rhetorical Traditions Still Matter. Her 2008 book, Living Room, Teaching Public Writing in a Privatized World, is #1 on my list of why the hell didn't you write this book in time for me to be able to use it when I was trying to write a dissertation about this stuff. Books. I think it's fair to say that she understands public writing as a practice as well as anybody in our field, maybe better. And she's confronted the politics of austerity in ways that are as brave as they are smart. Along with all that, she also publishes award-winning fiction. And also understand through the grapevine, she's not somebody you want to be on the other side of the table with in a union bargaining session. Tony Scott was an associate professor of writing and rhetoric at Syracuse University in the composition and cultural rhetoric program. That's my alma mater, by the way. So I couldn't be mad at Tony for not getting there in time for me to work with him in the same way that I'm mad at Nancy for not writing her book any sooner. But it's probably healthier for me just to be happy for the faculty and the students in that program that they get to have him there. His teaching runs the gamut of composition, rhetorical theory, method, and history courses. A glance at his CV reveals a lengthy list, like Nancy's, of provocative work across the major journals in our field, and chapters and debut collections. He and Brennan won in the 2014 Braddock Award for their article, Democracy, Struggle, and the Praxis of Assessment. Tony's 2009 book, Dangerous Writing, Understanding the Political Economy of Composition, is, in my estimation, one of the most important books our field has produced in at least the last 20 years, or maybe ever. On a personal note, when co-authors and I were working on drafting a proposal for our article in the 3C's Political Economy special issue that came out last year, Tony read a draft of that proposal and gave us crucial feedback that really helped us figure out and formulate what it was we were trying to say in that piece. At the same time, that he was writing a proposal of his own for that very same issue, and it would have been really easy for him to say, you know what, I'm not giving feedback to people I'm competing with, you guys just take care of yourselves. He didn't do that. It makes sense then that two scholars who have done so much and such high quality work on material conditions of writing and writing instruction and the profession would be the plenary speakers at a conference that's themed around, agency and advocacy in the age of austerity. And if that doesn't make enough sense on its face, read the edited collection, Composition in the Age of Austerity. I was lucky enough to review it pre-publication and couldn't endorse it enthusiastically enough. It's so good, in fact, that months later, when a copy of it showed up in my mailbox at school, I was halfway through the introduction again, when I realized again that I was totally blown away by something that I had already read and knew what it said, as if I hadn't seen it before. It's that good. Like both Tony's and Nancy's individual work, the collection's contributions and their framing in the opening are theoretically sophisticated, but concretely specific enough to satisfy those of us who want ideas about what to do, while explicating the context in which we currently live and work clearly enough to understand why certain kinds of actions just don't accomplish what they mean to. The book is simultaneously infuriating and hopeful, and whatever the dialectical synthesis is of those two things. And I expect that what happens in this room tonight will be similar in some way. The last thing I'll say, because I need to inflate your expectations a little bit more, is this. You have a student you have in your class every once in a while who doesn't say very much. Every once in a while, they'll just say something that stops everybody in their tracks. And you all sit there and you think, wow, that's one of the smartest things I have ever heard anybody say. I'm really glad I got to be in the room when somebody thought that. Nancy and Tony are those students. I've never spent more than like 2 minutes talking to either of them about anything, even weather actually, without thinking, I just can't believe that I got to hear somebody say that out loud. What a remarkable thing to be, what a remarkable thing to be near. I hope the two of them sharing the stage tonight will make that happen for all of us. So let's welcome Nancy Welch and Tony Scott.
By the way, so that I can read my text, I have my glasses off, so that means that if you can't hear me, just shout or something, because if you wave your arms, I won't be able to see you. So first, thank you to Seth for that wonderful introduction, and I also just want to note that Seth is co-editor of a new volume from the WCA Clearinghouse, Contingency, Exploitation, and Solidarity, Labor and Action in English Composition, that is also very germane for our concerns at this conference. And then I think Tony and I both want to thank Dominic and Kirsten and all of the conference planners who invited and arranged for us to be here. Because the conference theme is solving problems together, Tony and I want to situate the problems facing writing programs in the bigger context of neoliberal political economy. To paraphrase Marx, writing program directors try to find good solutions to the problems we face, but we do not do so in conditions of our own choosing. Our presentations are about critically elaborating the political economic agenda that has largely shaped the conditions most or all of us find ourselves working within. In a nutshell, to solve problems, we need an elaborated understanding of what the problems and their drivers are. My role is to present a primer of neoliberal rhetorics and realities, and I'll do it with pictures so I can make this as bearable as possible. First, some definitions. Neoliberalism is what has largely emerged as a global consensus that the solution to persistent crises in capital accumulation is to restore corporate profitability through labor casualization, deregulation, reducing or eliminating social supports, and privatizing formerly public institutions and resources, including education, so as to reduce the cost of doing business and create new markets for doing business, the education market, the healthcare market, the student debt market, and so on. June Jordan summed up neoliberalism brilliantly in her Reagan-era Home Toward a Final Solution, quote, "An unidentified reporter then queried the secretary as to whether this plan could be fairly translated as take down the trees, tear up the earth, evacuate the urban poor, and let the people hang, generally speaking." Neoliberalism isn't only rhetorical, it's materially rooted in persistent crises from the 1970s onward in the real economy. But what I'm especially interested in tonight is the rhetoric that trains us to see problems and their solutions in free market terms. The role of rhetoric in the social reproduction of neoliberal ideas, such as this "everyone should have a plan" ad from the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Everyone should have not a socialized plan, not a government-supported and funded plan, but a leave it to the family plan. And I'll come back to this ad shortly. A couple more examples of how neoliberalism is packaged and naturalized. Here are examples from an ad series that appeared in a human resource management magazine in the latter half of the 1990s, the Bill Clinton managed care health era. The rhetorical work these ads were doing was shifting the nation's understanding of healthcare from what had since the World War II era on had been viewed as part of compensation called labor share of the wealth workers produce, to defining under neoliberalism health benefits as a drain, a burdensome tax, or a gift from employer to employee that employees don't appreciate and take advantage of. For that audience of benefits managers, Northwestern National Life presents health benefits as a problem and chirpily says, let's do something about it. Solutions to the presumed problem of benefit overuse included, of course, pre-approvals, co-pays, and so forth, to, quote, train employees to make better healthcare decisions and encourage employees to be better consumers of healthcare, end quote. Beyond training and disciplining the population to see themselves as consumers in all realms, including healthcare and education, neoliberalism's upward transfer of wealth has also been facilitated by directing blame downward, making scapegoats of immigrants or illegals who are illogically said to be both lazy and to steal American jobs, or chastising black men for presumed lack of family values, or dismissing black and brown kids as no angel when shot by the police. In the same vein of scapegoating, we might place the uptick in the business press during the Great Recession of stories about the problem of employee theft and the solution of new surveillance, accountability, and security systems. Recall that this was when Wall Street received a massive bailout, some of that taxpayer money then used to reward executives with 6- and even 7-figure bonuses. That wasn't the theft named in the business press, however, where scrutiny fell instead on employees stealing time by surfing social media, or by extension, unproductive professors resting on their tenured laurels. In another neoliberal sleight of hand, The Economist put together their January 2011 issue to name the public sector as the culprit that caused the Great Recession. Here in this slide is an Economist editorial cartoonist presenting public sector workers as a gluttonous woman who wants fewer hours, more pay, more, while a tiny business-suited man cowers and flames engulf them both. Notwithstanding the ludicrousness of the implied argument, corporations cast as David rather than Goliath. In this issue, The Economist celebrates the near collapse of global markets caused by rapacious private sector greed as an opportunity to shift the blame onto the public sector. And the January 2011 Economist cover proclaimed, "Declare war on public sector workers, teachers, and their unions," with the first significant battle erupting the next month in Wisconsin. Here we find neoliberalism's ideological and intellectual architects quite openly, nothing conspiratorial about it, laying out possible game plans and proclaiming a worldview that is also packaged and circulated much more broadly beyond The Economist or the Financial Times. The packaging of that worldview includes not only arguments for privatizing public resources, but also for privatizing, offloading onto the individual or nuclear family social need. So here again, we return to Homeland Security and FEMA's Everyone Should Have a Plan ad campaign that ran during the summer of 2006 in upscale magazines such as Food and Wine. In case of terrorist attack or other emergency, the ad advises every family should have their own plan, adding, "There's no reason not to." Each member of this white, middle-class, suburban, two-car family has their role. The apparently stay-at-home mom will take her car to pick up the kids at school, then return home to, quote, await official instructions, end quote. The breadwinning dad will gas up the minivan and fetch his family. At first glance, this ad might seem benign, even banal, just another piece of the neoliberal educational apparatus promoting private leave-it-to-the-family solutions for childcare, elder care, healthcare, education, and even emergency preparedness. But consider this additional piece of the ad's historical and rhetorical context. This and similar ads in the campaign ran less than a year after Hurricane Katrina stranded thousands of poor and predominantly black New Orleanians. And privatized evacuation plans did not help Texans whose cars clogged highways and drained gas pumps as they tried to flee Hurricane Rita. In this rhetorical context, we can understand the work of these ads not as deliberative, concerned with assisting readers and puzzling through what their plan should be, but instead epidictic, ceremonially shifting the blame for the recent debacles of Homeland Security and FEMA, and thereby rehabilitating their tarnished reputations, at least among the upper middle class and elite readers of magazines like Food and Wine. For such readers, the argument everyone should have a plan, there's no reason not to, can seem perfectly reasonable and wise, a matter of common sense. If you've read any of the chapters in Composition in the Age of Austerity, I'm hoping you see the connections between this broader articulation of neoliberal realities and rhetorics and the specific conditions and challenges for composition programs in neoliberalized universities. The urgent question is, of course, what to do. Even though we did not put together Composition in the Age of Austerity with the impossible aim of providing solutions to a political economic consensus that extends well beyond any one college, university, or administrator, contributors do offer some very good counsel about coalition building and solidarity, for instance, and instances of effective resistance, such as Quebec's massive province-wide capital or pot-banging protests, and continued strike action to stave off austerity cuts and tuition hikes there. To these, I'd like to add a few more. First, understand that the scarcities we are facing are manufactured. It's not that there isn't enough money, but the money has been funneled elsewhere. At my university, for instance, a decade-long trend of replacing an aging professoriate with contingent rather than tenure-track faculty has netted the university close to $12 million annually for spending on administrative activities outside the academic mission. The university's budget hasn't gotten smaller. The share for academics is instead what has gotten smaller. So understanding where the money comes from and where the money goes matters, something we have access to at the University of Vermont because all faculty are unionized. We're able to enlist the help of the AAUP in auditing the university financial records, and then also find ways to provide some counter-rhetorical education for students on campus, as in this Wheel of Misfortune event, to engage and educate students about the golden parachutes and bonuses enjoyed by top administrators while staff and lecturers faced cuts. In this way and others, we're taking the advice of several contributors in Composition in the Age of Austerity and stepping out of an exclusive focus on our programs and disciplines to seek alliances and build solidarities with others. Our Wheel of Misfortune MC, for instance, was a professor in environmental engineering who was also gravely concerned that first-year composition for engineering students was at that time being stripped of critical inquiry and restless creativity in favor of narrowly instrumental outcomes. We can also take up as a key research topic how neoliberal rhetoric works and consider what role our curricula play in teaching discernment and resistance. I've already touched on the blame shifts, sleights of hand, and appeals to bootstrap self-reliance. And I've noted a couple of presses where neoliberalism's architects talk openly and transparently about what they're up to and why. But in day-to-day discourse, neoliberal rhetoric operates above all through obfuscation, through the fuzzy rhetorical games of la langue de coton, or woolen rhetoric. We can, of course, take the langue de coton as empty rhetoric, as in the case of these two outtakes from university strategic plans, and you can Google the phrases I've selected to see if I'm quoting from your university's strategic plan. They all kind of sound the same. But these kinds of somnambulistic texts that arrive through email or that we hear in faculty senate meetings week in and week out do effective rhetorical work. Most especially, neoliberalism's la langue de coton aims to persuade an audience that there has already been, usually among vague stakeholders, a democratic process of consultation, and that the present course is one everyone has already agreed on. As my university provost put it in a recent memo, the flywheel of university restructuring is already spinning, and now the task is to keep it going. By the way, I'll confess I don't know what a flywheel is. It's already happening, it's already been decided, stakeholders were consulted, neoliberalism depends on the presupposition of consensus, usually cast in passive voice, so nobody's quite sure how or when any of this was consented to. I'll confess that one way I deal with the wooden rhetoric that comes into my email box is to cut and paste it into Helen Sword's The Writer's Diet Test. But more seriously, I think we also need to contend with how vulnerable our own cherished rhetorical ideals and pedagogies make us and our students to these fuzzy claims of consultation, consensus, and a neoliberalized civility. Before I unpack this more, a historical footnote. 2 weeks ago, I attended the commemoration of the 40th anniversary of the Combahee River Collective Statement, an early articulation of what Kimberly Crenshaw would later term intersectionality, the understanding that the injustices produced by manifold forms of oppression and class exploitation don't occur on separate planes, but simultaneously. With its declaration that when Black women get free, we all get free, as co-author and activist Barbara Smith puts it, the Combahee River Collective Statement of 1977 presages the primary assertion of today's Black Lives Matter movement. When Black people get free, we all get free. In her remarks for the 40th anniversary panel, Barbara Smith also talked about the events shaping her political consciousness. The particular event she mentioned that really caught my attention was the 1969 mass student sit-down at the University of Chicago in defense of a sociology professor turned down for tenure shortly after she spoke out publicly against the war in Vietnam. Smith was part of that protest, and her sense of that sit-in's importance and also the problems it revealed with the new left helped move her towards formulating a Black and socialist feminist vision. This moment in Barbara Smith's biography caught my attention because the dean the protest was waged against was eminent rhetorician Wayne Booth. What the students sought to persuade him of was that Dixon should be granted tenure and that governance at the University of Chicago should be democratized to include students and residents in the surrounding community. Booth's response, quote, "Well, if there's anything I can do for you short of giving you what you want, please let me know," end quote. What happened in the end is that Booth oversaw the dismissal through suspensions and expulsions of scores of students for what he saw as a coercive, not a rhetorical act. I think that Barbara Smith and Wayne Booth both represent a set of ideas and a history that many of us want to claim for our scholarship and our daily work. Yet they also present two very different positions from which to see what was for both a defining moment, and even two very different articulations of the problem that moment presented. For Barbara Smith, it was one of several consciousness-raising moments that led her to co-authoring the Combahee River Collective Statement, where the problem was how to build a liberation movement that could take on all interlocking forms of oppression. For Booth, it led to the writing and publishing of his 1974 Modern Dogma and the Rhetoric of Assent, where the problem, giving us a particularly Dean's eye view of 1960s social movements, was the, quote, inability of most protest groups to get themselves heard, end quote. In fact, it's because of the protest groups of the 1960s, the fact that they did get themselves heard, that universities saw in the student body, faculty, and curriculum the significant democratization that neoliberalism has rolled back. Student strikes at the City College of New York, San Francisco State, and elsewhere created the conditions for composition as a contemporary discipline. But in Modern Dogma and other writings by Wayne Booth, Edward Corbett, and others, we have the articulation of ideals that have also shaped contemporary composition pedagogies. The ideals of people coming together on a plane of equality to solve problems together, but not through debate or protest or argument, but through cooperation, mediation, discursive deliberation, and consensus building. These are the ideals we find everywhere in our field, most recently in op-eds that promote, as John Duffy puts it, rhetorical friendship, the teaching of which is posited as an antidote to the alarming enmity of our political sphere. The problem is that neoliberalism strips away all of the necessary preconditions that the Habermasian communicative ideal depends on. Booth himself anticipated this in a chillingly prescient footnote near the very end of Modern Dogma. At the moment he was completing his book, the tenets of neoliberalism were just being advanced as a solution to economic crisis and slum. In fact, the University of Chicago was one of the primary and earliest incubators for what Booth, by 1974, was already recognizing as a, quote, inhumane economic system whose viciousness, deception, and privatization to the point of psychosis, end quote, would imperil civic institutions and civil discourse. So what to do? I think part of the answer is found in cultivating as much as possible spaces of solidarity and democracy where people really can come together for genuine exchange. That means not falling into the traps of competition, my program versus theirs, tenure track versus lecturers. Indeed, another version of the Combahee and Black Lives Matter slogans might be, when adjunct faculty get free, we all get free. Part of the answer rests also in further teaching ourselves and our students critical apperception of neoliberalism's fuzzy language games and the material, economic, political, social reordering these games assist. And from these spaces of solidarity and in response to what we discern, we should practice as democratically as we can and with as many others as we can muster the antidote to le langue de Coton, that is, le langue de bois, or wooden language. Wooden language, we could also think of as the rhetorical and often embodied arts of protest that our rhetorical theories have largely ignored and our pedagogies have tended to counsel against, is language that expresses a position, expresses opposition and who it is opposed to. It also assembles friends and allies. I know that when we think about solving problems together, the idea of le langue de bois, the language of mass resistance and opposition and protest, may not be foremost. But at least a couple of you I know are from campuses that have recently won important victories for your programs and students because faculty went on strike. And even if you are at a private college or in the kind of right-to-work state we may all soon find ourselves in, it was this kind of le langue de bois rhetorical action that was necessary to win the kind of university access, equality, and democracy now being dismantled, and that we're here tonight and for this conference to figure out what we can do to defend. Thank you.
I presented with Nancy a number of times, and somehow I'm always going second, which is not where I'm used to being. I also want to join others in thanking Kristen, Dominic. It's been amazing to see you guys pull together this conference as quickly and well as you have. Sort of being on the outside and watching it happen, I really appreciate the labor you put into it, and I appreciate how well it's done. Things come together. Also, thanks to Seth. I hope someday you'll be the person you described. but very flattered, and I appreciate it. I also appreciate the conference for just having me. It's an honor to be here, especially in this role. One of the things that Nancy and I wanted to do in composition and Age of Austerity is to contextualize everyday composition work within the broader political economies of higher education. But more importantly, we wanted to have chapters that show the actual ground level effects of austerity. The collection invites readers to think about how writing education is being changed operationally through how we are being compelled to do our work. So chapters describe challenges that most people here today are likely to find familiar. Challenges with the ways that outcomes assessment is being used to control curriculum, with how the revival of competency-based education is being used to reshape and in some cases replace writing courses. Chapters describing how WPAs have been compelled to work with private industry partners to economize curricula in order to address what one administrator called cost disease. and how austerity has cut funding to or eliminated prison writing education and other community writing initiatives, such as those fostered by the National Writing Project. I see sessions here that are going to touch on all of these issues, and it's very encouraging. Our work in composition is political and economic, but our scholarship isn't explicitly focused. Our scholarship that isn't explicitly focused on WPA work still rarely accounts for the economic relations that are necessary for research to have influence on teaching and learning. In academia, theory can be an end of itself, and the ways that our work is valued within our institutions compels us to think of it that way. Just as with any other labor, theory is abstracted from particular places and times in order for it to function as a commodity. Even within composition and rhetoric, which has closer ties to application than most other fields of the humanities, there can be a sense that those with authentic professional status are primarily producers of published scholarship, and the scholarship is supposed to be translated into practice somewhere, somehow, by someone, but it need not address the terms of that translation. WPA work and scholarship tends to be compartmentalized away from our other professional work. Nevertheless, published scholarship and composition is dependent on the troubled apparatus of writing programs. Curricula only exist in material enactment, and much of the scholarship that has currency in composition now comes from some kind of materialist perspective. Teaching for transfer, writing about writing, translingual and transnational pedagogies, ambient rhetorics, multimodal and genre-based pedagogy, all share an emphasis on awareness of immediate material environments of composing and uptake. In these curricula, composing is an activity, a mode of relations among people and our environments. Language is emergent and never static, or language is emergent, not static or bounded in these approaches. It's always reinvented in actual instances of use. Composing and theories of composing are dynamic, cultural, distributed, and embodied, and meaning is created through ongoing translation and socio-material environments. Composing theory is not just a commodity for scholars. It's something we all do in the world. With their focus on composing environments, linguistic diversity, and cultural attunement, current curricular theories don't align well with measures that economize writing education or cast it as a market activity. They confound common sense notions of language. They're not easily scalable, and the views of literacy that they promote are resistant to statistically reliable large-scale assessment. In the research project that I'm currently working on, I'm interested in how more fluid, more mobile, definitively emergent views of composition relate to what I'm calling the writing program construct. And by the way, I just stepped down after 10 straight years at the WPA. So I'm not doing sanctimonious critique of writing programs or of WPAs. I've done work too long to do that. Rather, I'm using this admittedly cumbersome term, the writing program construct, to bring attention to the writing program as an established historical, institutional and disciplinary frame, a frame that's commonly used to understand and order labor at particular sites. I believe at this moment it's imperative to ask whether too much of our research outside of WPA conversations, including research that claims a material orientation, is now disconnected from our actual material sites of educational practice. I also think we need to ask whether the writing program construct is adequate to help us respond to the complicated, actually existing political economies of composition. Economies necessarily involving struggles around resources, authority, laboring bodies, and as Nancy described, even language itself. Is the program construct too bound up in its procedurally stabilizing functions to adequately accommodate current research in literacy and learning? I believe that getting at these questions requires that we look at how crisis and precarity shape work in our field. In the US, writing programs have evolved in relation to crises, perceived literacy crises, and the always immediate crises created by the precarity of composition labor. Now in an era of increased austerity, the terms of work in all of higher education are changing at an accelerated rate. And I'll go through these quickly. Steady decreases in state allocated per student funding, that's set up post 2008. shifts of resources away from direct instruction, use of assessments to replace forced credit hours, mandated, often unfunded, I'll say typically unfunded, accountability assessment regimes, retrenchment, state-driven curricular standardization, evaluation of programs and departments as independent revenue-generating units, compulsory public-private industry partnerships. These changes bring about deep philosophical and ethical challenges for us all. But as we continually try to adjust, they also make apparent the strong relationship between precarity and the functions of the writing program construct, as we generally think of it. Many elements of writing programs seek to create stability in response to this precarity. The precarious terms of work for most who teach writing, the varied educational backgrounds of those who teach writing, and this often means competing or contradictory views of literacy and the purposes of composition. The still often shaky legitimacy of composition as a research discipline in many of our institutions. The murky spatial, temporal, and conceptual domains of writing programs. Teachers who have multiple jobs across multiple institutions. Teachers who work in shared office space or have no office space at all. Online courses that often lead to even further disembeddedness from our workplaces and alienate us further from each other. Courses spread out geographically across multiple campuses. Do you want me to go on? The program construct offers procedural means to respond to these precarious terms, to attempt to assert areas of authority, establish order, and provide coherence. We don't often like to state it this bluntly, but the never-met promise of writing programs is that writing education can be made programmatic, that it can be rationally ordered. The mechanisms through which this programmatic order is pursued are also many of the elements that can be said to constitute what many of us have come to imagine writing programs are through our professional training. Every actually existing site is different, but much like the genre function, the writing program functions to create typified responses to similar circumstances. So as we move from one site to another, we tend to see different iterations of a rather familiar set of practices. In a sense, the construct is a conjured scene or an invoked algorithm, a vexed set of relationships and procedures that are put into motion by crisis and response. The professional narratives we seek to substantiate are also countered by on-the-ground counter-narratives, by the disruptive presence of actually existing and agentive bodies and places doing things, and by the economic terms over which none of us has control. As locations at which disciplinary thinking and desire interface with actually existing practices, writing programs are points of cooperation and friction among people and ideas with very different aims, power, and utilities. In my daily work as a WPA, I've been aware of these frictions. They're as familiar as they are seemingly intractable. I'm conscious of the vexed relationship between circulating representations of program work, such as those that appear in curricular statements and in assessment numbers, and the rich, varied ways that people around me are actually creating and learning. I'm conscious of questions and problems of ideology and the politics of language, of economics and labor, of professional expertise, and who does the work of writing education under what conditions. I'm conscious of the desire of my department to exert professional domain over writing, and also of how fluid and broad the domains of composing and learning actually always are. I'm conscious of how differently those of us who work in writing education imagine what we are doing based on our institutional positions, our investments, and our disciplinary backgrounds. I know that most current programs are hopeful maps written over the hopeful maps of past WPAs. And the traces of what can never be completely overwritten always bleed through. In my own developing research, I'm currently looking at how students and part-time teachers negotiate their writing across multiple institutions. For instance, Syracuse University is surrounded by other colleges and universities. I missed the slide there. And these are our 8 universities and other institutions in central and upstate New York. Currently, part-time faculty in our writing program teach in at least 8 other institutions. Public and private, research is extensive, and community college. These institutions offer substantially different pay, different working conditions, and they afford just blew my big moment. I hope you weren't watching. Different pay and working conditions, and they afford teachers with very different amounts of agency and opportunities for professional development. This is the real economics of composition, and it's also an important part of how curriculum is actually practiced. The stated curricula at these schools are based on different theories of composition. They also have different required practices that teachers must follow, sometimes daily. In interviews, teachers indicate that they distinguish between institutions, but they also resourcefully negotiate among them. For instance, meshing assignments and curricular vocabularies. Within these negotiations are myriad overlaps, innovative repurposing, and sometimes knowing and unknowing contradictions. I want to understand more about teachers and students' motilities and how they lead to cross-institutional translations and meshing. To what extent is the practice living curricula at many of our programs actually located in the movement of people and resources among clusters of schools? Behold. To be clear, I highly value the published research of composition, and I think a good discipline makes writing education far more effective, ethical, and socially just when research influences practices. However, the gaps between representations of composition work in a lot of our published scholarship and actually existing practices at our varied institutions undermines its relevance and its effectiveness. I'm encouraged by recent work that addresses political economy and how it relates to how we do pedagogy. Success Neutral Collection, I'm going to plug that. It should be read. I'm excited about the chapters found in Economies of Writing, which is a new collection by Bruce Warner, Bryce Norris, and Susan Ryan. I like David Martin's excellent collection, Transnational Writing Program Administration. All of that work brings together scholarly aims and actual on-the-ground conditions in some way or another. Also, other research on scale in writing. Some of it in composition, some of it in literacy studies and K-12 education. Work that seeks to account for how flows of text, people, and resources shape learning environments. And I'm thinking here of work by, among others, Jan Nesper, Teresa Lewis, Glenda Hall, Rebecca Lormer. Taken as a whole in this scholarship, not only funding, but also space, identity, and language are all understood as equally valued and unequally valued and distributed resources. They're brought together as elements of dynamic writing economies. In her recent ethnographies, including The Mushroom at the End of the World on the possibility of capitalist ruins, anthropologist Anna Tsing examines economic and ecological crisis in the Anthropocene. Toggling between the micro and macro, she looks at how and what capitalism destroys, environmentally and socially. And she also looks at how people collaborate, create, and develop survival strategies. She calls her diverse, globally connected research sites zones of awkward engagement. What is especially intriguing about Tsing is that as a researcher, she puts the contradictions and distress of capitalism at center stage rather than trying to avoid it. She deals with complications of global and neoliberal crisis by plunging into it rather than by bracketing it off. Following Tsing, and with all of you, I want to inquire into these troubled spaces between writing and education as a construct in our professional imaginary, and writing education as a living, embodied activity performed under conditions that, especially at this political moment, are often openly hostile to equality, intellectual creativity, and human dignity. One way to do this is to recognize the emergent theory in the movement and work of our students, of teachers, within our real material learning environments. In this troubled and challenging era, it's my hope that we can move toward a field in which clean distinctions between activism, scholarship, and composition, and doing the daily work of writing education shrink or disappear altogether. Thank you. We wanted to ask two things as a way to sort of move from what we're doing today into the rest of the conference. What key questions do you want to take away from today, from these presentations and the rest of the conference? And what are some of the touchstones or guides you'd like us to keep in mind as you head into tomorrow's sessions? something that we can kind of come back to on Saturday and revisit when we've all seen the work that's going to happen here.
So just to add to that, I mean, if anyone has a question for me or Tony about our presentations, we're glad to take those, but we also thought instead of just the usual kind of Q&A session, since this plenary is the charge was to motivate people to go out into the conference and carry through some of these perspectives, questions, or maybe counter perspectives into the sessions that you'll be attending. So I thought that I could type some of these out. Maybe we can get them on the Facebook page or share them in some way. And it would just be great to hear from folks in the room about what's on your mind and what you're going to be carrying forward into the next few days. And I'll do the typing and Tony can.
Either one of you.
I'm very interested, Nancy, in your distinction between woolen language and wooden language. And I think a question that might be really generative for us is to think about who are the mentors for the wooden language? What groups or individuals or positions where they can use this language that you describe as expressing positions, expressing opposition, naming enemies. Because all of those things are difficult to do from the positions that we create.
So, I mean, I'm sorry, I cut that out, and I do want to respond to that quickly if I could. And you know, part of it I think is very much thinking about these issues in terms of class. You know, when you're a writing program administrator, your position is usually kind of lower level management. So you don't have the collective social power of the working class. You don't have the political and economic power of whoever your university's elites are. And this is how I think about Wayne Booth. I take him genuinely that he really was, a harried dean is how he describes himself, because he's got a middling amount of authority to deal with this. But I also think that, from a Marxist perspective, the questions of the middle class is always, is the switch class? Whose side are you on? Who do you look for your what your future social power and voice might be? And so even if as an individual administrator your power may be middling, I think the idea is it's always looking down rather than up. So at my university, for example, when the financial crisis of 2008-2009 gave the administration a pretext to call for a wholesale university restructuring to funnel money out of the undergraduate education and into spires of excellence that probably many of you others had as well. It really depended on two groups were at the forefront of organizing a massive campus walkout and sit in against that. And that were undergraduate students, but also the contingent faculty campus-wide. It helped that we had a union. But they were the ones who knew that very immediately had been told, don't buy Christmas presents this year because you may not have a job, after May. And they ended up being, the most vulnerable, but also at that moment, the ones who were out front visibly fighting. And that's where our ability to defend our first year composition program and writing center at that moment came from. That's a very particular circumstance, but it's always where does your long-term power really reside?
Well, you guys talked about that David Bartholomew essay at PMLA around 2000, where we kind of charted how the rise of competition studies has really not led to the dream of more competent experts teaching writing, but that a kind of emerged a kind of faculty, tenured faculty culture and WPA culture where some people rose to the top and got status in the way that other disciplinary faculty had always had it. And I guess I'm wondering, what is the role of the tenured faculty in looking at taking on labor issues? It's pretty, and I consider myself a part of this group, pretty easy to say, well, it's management. But on some level, there's a real, you see at the same time that for tenured faculty, many institutions have seen decrease in class load and a teaching load and an uptake of research load. It's really hit adjuncts, and they're the ones that are taking it. My own institution, the tenured faculty will sometimes take a general education class and have fewer students in it than their adjunct counterparts because they have scholarly demand, which is the same class. But I think they feel that they're up against administrations that kind of do not take any personal accountability for that. And I think they have some personal accountability for that. And I don't know if that's my pure background or if that's right. I think that Marxist kind of analysis is, that's small potatoes. It's big bad, big guy up here that's responsible. But I guess I really wonder, as a discipline that's become empowered, and many of us have enjoyed a lot of success, in part because we're a useful discipline for administrators and for lots of parties. But are we taking on the right responsibility? Or are we kind of passing the buck?
I actually have something that kind of touches on that. I'm interested in your research. I currently teach at a two-year technical school. I'm an adjunct lecturer, and then I also teach at a university where I'm an adjunct. And I was teaching at a HBC until May as an adjunct because of the fact that they do not pay adjuncts enough to live off of if you just work at one school. So at one point in time, I had over 260 students, and teaching writing and composition courses and literature courses, and the course load got so demanding that I ended up having to drop one of the schools in order just to keep up with doing my job. But I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'm applying for full-time positions, and they're telling me, well, you need to be doing more research and this and that. Well, I'm teaching 6 classes at one school and 6 classes at the other school and then 4 classes at the third school. And when am I supposed to have time, because of what you're paying me, to also do the research and the writing that you want me to do in order to get that full-time position? And so it's becoming this huge looping circle where I have no life other than teaching and grading and researching to try and meet the demands so that I can get the full-time position where they're hiring people straight out of college with PhDs who have no experience for the same positions that I'm applying for, and I have 15 years of teaching experience, 5 years of college, and it just becomes really frustrating. And there's no set guide, and there's no. I look for places to find help with these things, and everybody's like, well, that's just the life of an adjunct, and it's not something you can keep up for 10 or 15 years. So trying to find a balance of some sort. And I want to find out where I can find your research, because I'd like to look into seeing what you're finding.
So I haven't published anything out of that yet.
Okay.
You can definitely talk after this. I do want to sort of try to tie these things together though, because I think I've been conditioned to be a publisher of scholarship. And it's happened over time. I was an adjunct in 1995, 6. Over time, I go to graduate school. Publishing is what you do, it's what you learn to do. And you learn to commodify it, and over time you learn to commodify yourself, right? And what we're doing is we're competing with other people who are doing the same thing for an ever-shrinking number of positions in an ever-shrinking pie. We're down to 24% nationally of teachers are tenurable, or are even on a track that can make them tenurable. So 76% of the people in our field are in sort of similar circumstances. Yet we don't talk about it, and this is something else I've been thinking about recently, not to bring up my own autobiography too much, but I was a working student in a school in which most of the students were first-gen students like me. So we would go to class, and most of us had jobs and we worked long hours, but we didn't ever talk about being working students in the classroom. We pretended to be traditional students, right? It was the game we played. I think now in our writing programs, it's been an established thing in writing programs, nobody talks about the other jobs they have. They come in and everybody's a faculty member at your institution. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is, why not? Why don't we open it up and talk about all the other classes you're teaching, all of the ways that the philosophies of those places are coming together or not, and how we can generate knowledge out of that.
Well, I found when I try to openly talk about the other schools I teach at, the school I'm trying to get full-time at frowns upon it. They would rather me quit the other schools and just focus on them, but in doing that, I wouldn't make enough money in order to be able to survive. And so it becomes a conundrum in talking about it, so you just pretend it's not there.
Yeah. Okay,
So this isn't specifically to that, but one of the things that really sobered me about Gene Gunner's contribution to composition in the Age of Austerity is that out of looking at the work of Sid Dobrin and others, she says she doesn't endorse this, but that she imagines a coming future where there is a layer of writing studies scholars at elite institutions. I'm not at an elite institution, but at an elite institution who do composition and rhetorical scholarship completely detached from and free from writing programs and writing curricula altogether. So a sphere where what you're describing becomes even more and more, so the reality is much more where it's impossible to do research. And that at most public colleges, universities that are not, in that kind of very top tier, this is what we will be looking at. And especially as those numbers of tenured faculty shrink and shrink and shrink ever more, there are very few people who really have long-term, who are going to have long-term any kind of real privilege or security. So again, in terms of what to do, I think that part of it is actually, really knowing what are the material conditions for people on your campus. For me, it's been being unionized and having tenure track, non-tenure track faculty, part-time and full-time together in one union has been incredibly important just for learning about and being mindful about what are all of the conditions that people are within, and then not putting out job ads. Like, I don't know if people saw the one from the University of Illinois Chicago that recently circulated. 67% FTE, 0.67 FTE for a lecturer in German to supervise 10 graduate students, oversee 14 classes at 3 different levels, develop the curricula, et cetera, for $28,000 a year. And that is a university that recently went out on strike in defense of faculty and students. So I don't know, I think that in terms of the collection composition and in the Age of Austerity, Gene Gunner suggests one vision, which is that some people just walk away and detach themselves from these problems altogether by, trying to position themselves in elite institutions. Anne Larson suggests another view, which is to walk away from the field altogether. Her essay is called "Composition's Dead," and she's just like, I'm out of this. I will not participate in this anymore. I think we're here because we are trying to find something else, another kind of just way to act within our institutions and mindful of those bigger forces that we're up against.
I have a question. I just finished the workshop, and we talked a lot about assessment, which I think So how do we negotiate the need for assessment because we want to determine student success when it also seems to be playing into the neoliberalism position and language?
I'm sure that was a complicated discussion that you had. I believe in assessment too. I enjoy designing assessments, but I've done it at 2 institutions and the situations were remarkably different. So I do think that labor always has to be in the picture with assessment. The labor of doing the assessment, we need to be resistant to asking people to do assessment work for free or compelling or sometimes guilting them into doing assessment. We need to make that labor visible to upper level administrators. I think also we need to take care with how the numbers are being interpreted and used if we're generating numbers. I've done a number of things, including always supplementing numbers with qualitative data. I always report on what the labor conditions are in the program when I send in assessment reports. I always mention who's doing the assessment and how much they're getting paid. Just making it all visible. Getting beyond people looking at a set of numbers and saying, okay, that's performance.
So there are a number of hands around here. Maybe we can just kind of go in a circle and hear from everybody and then respond.
Back in the back, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, one part of this, I think, is that many of our administrators depend upon our commitment to our students to work for free. So most of my career, I directed the Writing Center, directed the writing program, and taught full load because I wanted to make sure I did a good job at the Writing Center and I did that for free. So my question is, how do we refuse to work for free while at the same time not hurting our students? Because we're there because we care about them, and I found myself many times doing things for free because I knew if I didn't, the students would be harmed by that. So how do you find that balance?
I think what we'll do is take a few more comments and questions and then respond. And then in addition to, I think there were 2 people over here and then in the purple shirt over here.
I have 2 comments. Or am I not next?
Well, I think Kirsten has the microphone over here. So. And then she'll make her way back.
I don't know. The first thing I wanted to say is I think what's so powerful about what both of you did is you gave these very complex frameworks of theory about neoliberalism, but you grounded them in with the first talk, you grounded them in some very grounded images and some primary evidence that showed us exactly how neoliberalism manifested. And I think with the second talk, you gave us some very specific examples of how that then manifested with composition programs. I think the problem with what I'm hearing every time is everyone tells their own story, but I think the field has often told us that the localities of our stories are not very important. That the locality of stories doesn't really tell something of a bigger story, and I would like to disagree with that, is I think that what we actually need is a clearinghouse of griping and bitching and moaning that would go into a place where we could look at it as primary evidence, as both of you did this evening in your talks, and put it in a place where we can look at it in the analytical way that you did, and put it into a framework of theory. So, I just want to respond. 1, kudos to both of you, to your hard work. And 2, I want to say, one of the things I would like people to think about is how can we find a place to find a clearinghouse of our moaning and our belly aching that I actually think is valuable, so that we can actually think about it, so it can actually be primary evidence to do something in the world.
Thank you.
I don't need a mic. So I really appreciate this, inspired by this, but I'm concerned by this too. I've had 4 jobs after my doctorate, and I'm not complaining. I'm in the 24% here. But I've worked in both the Carolinas and West Virginia and Georgia, right, work states. And the title of the next edit collection needs to be the WPA and the right to work state. See what Luther thinks. That's where we're all going. But you know, this wooden language you're talking about, taking a position and doing it with as many people as possible, that will get you fired in those states. And talking about the other jobs we have in 2 of the 5 institutions I've worked at, taking another position is actually against policy, and you can be dismissed for it. So you ask why we don't talk about taking those positions. Well, we want to keep the positions we have. And so, again, I'm inspired by this, but you guys are talking about really dangerous stuff, profoundly dangerous stuff, and it's going to become more dangerous as we move forward. And you know, that's something we probably should keep in mind.
This will all be right to work states.
Yes, yes, and we were very, very close to that.
Thank you. We have time for one more question maybe for right now, and then we can continue.
Okay.
That's the one you need to respond to. You can just put it on your list of questions. But did I hear you right in your comments that we had a turn of heart? You went from being, you know, kind of the hammer of the deans into a more relaxed or accepting or embracing whatever. Did I hear that right? Did you make a turn?
Not quite. You know, so he still writes and publishes this book that lays out the Habermasian ideal and still sees, you know, or articulates the idea of sit-ins and sit-downs and so forth as not being in his realm of rhetoric. But he has that footnote that in the same way that I find Sigmund Freud's footnotes to be.
Drawing back on it a little bit of Paul. So I think it's really interesting as a question to explore how do you get people to draw back from that and recognize that they've been co-opted, you know, that they've been turned into that the hammer that I was thinking of, like where you let yourself be co-opted. And I also just wanted to comment that the woolen and wooden language reminded me a lot too of Corbett's essay, the open literacy of man.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, that dynamic right there, is a question I would want to explore.
We have time just to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that first of all, it's very clear that most all of us are going to be in so-called right to work states that will seem to take all kinds of means of wooden rhetoric or the rhetoric of closed fist or you know of really just kind of solidarity actions and ways to get our voices and our students' voices heard that will make that more dangerous. And so that's why I think that in terms of if you have time at all for research, or if you want to engage in an interesting research project with students in a class you're teaching, looking at the histories of your own institutions to find out, you know, when and how different programs came into being, and you know if we roll back the clock to the beginning of the 20th century, every state was a right to work state, and workers were defined by federal court decisions as the property of their employers, who had no right as the property of their employers to speak out against their employers, to picket, to leaflet, to do anything like that. So I think that for me, that's why looking at history is so important and rich. But even just in day to day, I think that we learn to neoliberalism really depends on everything being privatized and behind closed doors. So one or two people trying to plead with a dean or a provost. And on my campus right now, we have a writing center director who's getting ready to retire. Very few people on campus know this. Most people on campus are very invested in this writing center. And there are so many things about it that are fantastic. And I think that learning to talk publicly, it doesn't always have to mean going out with a picket sign, but learning to talk with other colleagues, talk with other people on campus, knowing who our real stakeholders are, and building solidarity relationships with them, and kind of deprivatizing those conversations about what's happening to our programs, what the future of our writing center will be. That's a step that I think people can imagine taking, and it can potentially just bring some of those back channel conversations out into the open.
Do we have anything else we want to say, do before we?
If you guys are done.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah, okay, great. Well,
Thank you all for these.
Yes,
great
So just a couple of things before you disperse. On Saturday, we'll have a chance to do some more Q&A with Tony and Nancy, so we'll be able to continue this conversation. Just a few announcements for you, just about the conference in general. The program itself is the most updated version of all the sessions is in the guidebook version of the app or on the guidebook on the web. So if there haven't been many changes or cancellations, but you always find the most updated version there, and you can also ask at the registration desk. I'll make any announcements at 7:30 on breakfast, during the breakfast times, and also each evening at each meeting. A word about the sessions themselves. Some of them are here in Hilton, and some are across the street in the UT Conference Center. So just directly across the street, it's not far. We've tried to keep the time between so that you have time to get to them. The fourth floor. Just be careful walking across the street, please. It is a little bit of a busy street, so use the crosswalks. Let's see, questions. If you have questions about rooms, technology, and stuff like that, the CWPA at utk.edu goes right to me, so I'll be having that, and I can try to respond to them. We'll have people come around and check on that, and you can also go to the registration table to see if you can address technology or equipment questions as they come up. And I think that's it for right now. I look forward to seeing you in the hallway back here for lunch and dinner tomorrow, and then lunch on Saturday. So have a great conference.